A very warm welcome, Amaya, and thanks for agreeing to our request to come and share your thoughts on IT sector. So those who are new to, they are not aware, though I would like to take the opportunity to introduce him. He's a tech enthusiastic who has worked in various roles from a programmer to consultant and solution architect and CTO, founder of a startup. So he, as we can see in his profile, he trades Nifty and anything that's tradable, he is interested in that. So with that note, I would request opening remarks from you, and would also like to know small introduction on your part as well. Over to you, Amaya.
Sure. Thank you, Prince, for having me. Uh, so that intro that you gave is a little bit obsolete now because it's been a while since I have traded very actively, primarily due to the time difference. I live in Germany. I work in Germany. By profession, I'm an SAP consultant. I started my career in 2006 after my engineering. And since then, it has been quite a bit of a journey. Worked in various roles, have seen technology and all these IT companies evolve from up close. So have a fair bit of view on how things are developing or shaping up on the ground. Sometimes it may be construed as, since you work in IT, you have a bias. But I've been meticulous to ask that question time and time again to myself that whether I'm carrying a bias whenever I'm talking about a certain company, for example. So it's been about 16, 17 years since I'm working in this domain. I have three failed startups under my belt. Uh, so the recent one was back in 2019. I will not get into those details because I really want to focus on the questions and the discussion that we want to, specifically allocate to the IT sector since the results have started coming in. So I think with that we are good to go. Uh, so you let me know how you want to proceed.
Yeah, Mia. So, Ravi and I would be asking some questions, and in the meantime, those who have joined us, they can send in their request, and we will take up your questions with Amaya, and that's the way we want to go. So, Ravi, over to you.
Hey, thanks, Prince, and thanks, Amaya, for coming and sharing your knowledge on IT sector. So we'll straight away start on Q&A. Few things actually I wanted to know. Uh, what we understand is due to COVID now, what happened was a lot of the adoption which IT sector would have taken gradually. The companies in the West preponed those adoption, and hence there was a lumpy kind of revenue growth we saw last year in IT services companies. Mainly I track only 4 or 5 top companies. I saw their result, and I feel that might be the reason for that lumpy growth was the preponement of digital adoption from West. Is there material truth in this statement, or uh, it's actually a genuine growth which has come?
Well, it's mix of both. So there is definitely some lumpiness. I will not deny to that. But what happens is, as you rightly said, because of COVID and changing nature of business, and in order to continue operating as usual, a lot of companies actually rescheduled their plan to digital transformation and going digital, right? So uh, actually before we get into this, we have to look at this entire sector and how it has shaped up over, let's say, last 20-22 odd years, right? So I'm not considering the dot com boom era, uh, but from the year of 2000 until 2008, or let's say 2010, that was probably the period of the foundational development, because the kind of growth that we are seeing in the digital transformation or the cloud business or the digital revenues that we are seeing right now, the root of all these, or rather say the root of this growth or this adoption goes back into that period. Because I always say that there are, with the technology, there is something very interesting attached to it called as a time to market or time to maturity, right? So what we see now is the digital transformation is a commonplace everywhere. But the tools and the platform and the scale that was necessary to achieve that, that was taking shape between those foundational years. I still remember back in 2008 or 9, I was pitching to one of the pharma companies in Switzerland, and we proposed them one of the early cloud solutions that we had in the enterprise software space. And the typical answer, the pushback was, we want to own our data. We don't know where the data goes, right? What happens if tomorrow cloud is switched off? So from that period to this period, when companies are literally issuing a lot of smaller deals, the total cost of ownership has actually gone down. And what happened, you correctly said it, and I have also expressed this a lot of time, that a lot of companies suddenly woke up to the need of having a digital presence. That was not only to keep the operations running, but what happened is, because of the lockdowns, it was very difficult to reach the customer. It was very difficult to see how the customer preferences are changing. So there was a constant need to be near to the customer and basically to respond to the changing need of the customer in real time, right? So that basically gave kind of a shot in the arm to all these IT companies, and the digital revenue started growing suddenly out of nowhere. So that lumpiness was definitely there. But what that lumpiness has done is it has changed the dynamic of the industry. So we are transitioning from the era where people used to track a lot of large deals, $1 billion plus, multi-billion-dollar plus. And from that era, if you see, the total cost of ownership of actually owning that technology was very significantly high. And any wrong decision in selecting a technology would directly mean that your technical debt rises, right? So the technology is not necessarily a deciding factor. It's basically the lowest common factor, right? So from that era, we have come to this era where the total cost of ownership of the technology, or going digital or going cloud, has come down very significantly. So companies have changed their outlook at the fundamental level. What I mean by that is, if you look at the period of 2010 to 2020, companies were very picky when actually releasing the tech spends. It was very strategic, and they had their 5 years, 7 years, 10 years technology roadmap. And all these big companies like Oracle and SAP, they used to release their 5 years roadmap, in which year what they want to launch, and what are the platform improvisations that are going to come, right? So that basically means is, unless you have deep pockets, you cannot basically have a meaningful technology adoption. That was that period, right? And because of that, a lot of small companies, they were followers. They were not interested to take the lead and try something new, because it was risky and the TCO was always very high. But what this digitization or COVID has done is, it has opened eyes of everybody that adopting technology not necessarily mean that your technical debt will rise. There is an easy exit, right? So not sure how many of you come from the enterprise software background, but as you know, the perpetual license for any enterprise suite, be it Oracle or SAP, it costs multi-millions, right? So buying a software and then realizing, oh, it doesn't fit my need, that basically means a debacle, right? So a lot of companies have actually gone bankrupt just because of the incorrect implementation of their enterprise suites. So companies were very, very careful of releasing their technology spends, but that has fundamentally changed now. So you will see even a small SME operating out of Chakan in Pune, for example, they are also willing to move their operations, all their workloads from their on-premise servers to the clouds in order to cut down the cost. The process level automation or the edge level automation is also coming in picture. So basically, to answer that once again, to come back to the question that you asked, Ravi, is definitely the initial lumpiness was there. We can't give the premium that we initially gave to all these IT companies on the cloud spends or the digital spends, but it has fundamentally changed the way industry is going forward. So going forward, you will see lot companies reporting large number of small deals that you are executing in a much shorter period of time. And that basically takes us to the question that you asked me in DM, is revenue per employee. So we will come back to that point later. But I think it has changed the way industry is going. The fundamental direction has changed.
Okay. And so I guess we should track more on the small size deal and whether they are impacting the profitability of the companies. That would give us a better gauge how the company would perform in near future.
Yeah,
Is that
it's early on. How will we basically measure this, the impact of large number of small deals? Because this paradigm is really new to everybody, right? And when we say large number of small deals, that means you cannot put too many people, executing that small project. So project duration, from at least in enterprise space, it used to be, let's say, 2 years, 3 years. That will now come down to 6 months, 7 months. You can't put more number of people just to get your project execution expedited, right? So that will not happen. So we are still early in this phase. So that's why you see a lot of analysts still give emphasis on large deals. They focus their questions on how your large deal pipeline is looking for the next year or the year after. But unfortunately, even the companies and the management cannot answer that, because the way contracts are given to these IT companies, that itself is changing. So with that, it will also mean that the way you price your contracts, that will also change. The pricing will also change. So there is a lot of change that is going on at the moment as we speak.
okay? Tell me one thing. We also gauge this. How much is the IT weight in the index? What I remember, it used to be pre-COVID. Now I remember it used to be 13, 15, 16, 13, 15% kind of range of IT weight in the indices. But it suddenly shot up to something 22, 23 before the correction started few months back, and now
Okay.
it's about 18, I guess. What my understanding was, it should be very, again coming back to the same point. The IT adoption, no one can stop. Even a banking industry, we call a company a technology company with a banking license. That's how
Yeah.
the future would be. So, would it be fair to say that there should be only 50, 100 bps point increase in tech? Is tech still looks like overvalued to you? Primarily the IT services part. Let's keep our discussion first on the IT services companies part. We will leave the ERD. If someone have the questions, they can ask on that. But do you think the valuation still after this correction, if you want to comment on valuation?
Well, to be very honest, valuation is not my forte. I don't understand the basic nitty-gritties of valuation. That I'll be very honest with you. But reading the comments from all the people from financial backgrounds and CFAs, and so reading from their post, it seems that valuations are still stretched in some of the pockets, even very significantly stretched. Uh, but what's happening in my view is this drawdown from the top is actually, it was uncalled for, to be very honest. It's nothing that there is a spend cut down or there are delays. There are some delays, but at the very basic level, as in, if you are going for a project demo, the customer is saying nahi agle mahine aao, for example. But that kind of delays are there, which was not there earlier. But I think we are in a sweet spot, and I one thing I always say कि 10 साल पहले जैसा situation था, you can't compare or value an IT company on a 10-year median PE. The way we were doing business 10 years ago is not same the way we do business today, right? So as I mentioned earlier, that used to be the deals, strategic accounts and key customer accounts. Slowly that will start changing. So I think we are in a sweet spot. Unfortunately, the sentiments are at very, how I say, at the nadir, at the very lowest of it. I understand that किसी को IT company में कुछ hold ही नहीं करना है. But that said, I think there may be a muted growth for another quarter or two. But after that, as we see the attrition coming down, there will be a lot of clawback. So TCS also mentioned they'll claw back the margin. LTI का result आया आज. It seems that the volume loss they had, the on-site volume loss they had in the previous quarters, they had mentioned, or they had given guidance that there will be at least 2 quarters of impact. But it seems that looking at the margin that they have achieved, it seems that they have already clawed back large portion of it already, right? So I'm not a valuation expert, but I think we are in a sweet spot. If somebody has never invested in IT, can consider investing in select pockets. Look at Tata Elxsi, for example, phenomenal result, right? Mindtree has also given phenomenal result. So I think if somebody has not invested at all, can actually start to nibble here. But we are not at the level where desperately kahin se paisa allocate karo. We are not at that level yet.
Okay. I'll put just one more question, and then I guess Ganesh is online. After that, Ganesh, you can ask your question. Just one thing. Say there are enough talk of US going into recession next year. If normal understanding for someone in the financial market, now if US goes into recession, there would be some kind of curtailment in spending. Those kind of thing might come.
Right.
Other things we hear is when there is pressure in the market, they go for M&A, restructuring, and that kind of thing also cut down or the revenue pie for the IT companies.
Mm-hmm.
And on the extreme side, whenever there is bad market in US, some president, some governor will talk about populist measure that there is so much of job loss because of Asian countries. Any possibility you read on that side? And I think if that comes now, because no one can stop the transition of IT, if that comes, that would be a phenomenal time to get into IT companies who have not yet invested. But any thought on those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. If that happens, definitely that would be like a COVID moment for a lot of people, right, who missed investing in IT back then. So historically, if you look at the recessions in the US, we have always seen that in whatever year the recession hits US markets, the year followed by that is typically the Nifty, IT index, post negative growth. So it doesn't grow, it doesn't give any returns. But typically after that year, at least for 4 to 5 consecutive years, or 3 to 4 at least, that would be safe, let's say. So 3 to 4 consecutive years, it gives a pretty phenomenal returns. And that has been the trend. If you look at the year of 2000 and the growth until 2003, year of 2008, and then the growth from 2009 or 2010 onwards until 2011, 2012. So IT index has given pretty phenomenal returns after that. It is common understanding that if US gets into recession, lot of on-site opportunities will come down and lot of offshoring will increase. That's a common understanding, and that still holds true. So there is no change to that, and that's what Indian IT industry stands for, right? So we are still fighting on pricing. So that's how we are capturing the market. But again, circling back to what we discussed in the initial question, companies don't have to stake very significant amount to keep their technology innovation running. So running the business is one thing, but investing for the technology innovation or the technology of the future, or what companies want to achieve in, let's say, next 2-3 years down the line, they don't have to invest any significant amount. That's the fundamental change that has happened since this cloud adoption, the digital transformation that is coming into picture. So in my view, even if there are delays that will be at the edge, so edge as in there are some companies which, for example, have this process automation products or process automation services, right? So maybe that will take a bit of a hit. But if you see, the way out of this recession is only through technology. So even if there is a small bump in the tech spend, we should not miss that opportunity to get into good companies who are positioned well. So positioning is extremely important. In the previous space also, I mentioned this topic, that how to zero down on an IT company to select where you really want to invest, right? So positioning of that company has to be very critical. But if that happens, as you rightly said, that opportunity shouldn't be let go. How I see this playing out is over next 2 or 3 years, a significant portion of the workloads will be in the cloud. So that will become a kind of a commodity. Okay, so we gave a lot of digital premium to all those revenues a year back, but that will become a commodity 2 years down the line. It may happen earlier or it may happen a bit later also, but that will happen eventually. And the convergence of IT and OT that we have, that's the next lever. So if the cloud was the lever that got executed a couple of years ago, the convergence of IT and OT is the next lever that will get executed in next 2 or 3 years down the line. So I'm pretty optimistic on both IT and OT. So if that happens, if that kind of a black swan event comes, I'll just go on and add what I'm holding.
Yeah, Ameya. So, Ameya, I would also like to know your view on the service side and product side business economics, and how you see, like in US, we usually see B2C side of the IT industry, and whereas India primarily they focus on B2B. So, your view on that would like to.
A product is always B2C, right? And not necessarily. I mean, there are B2B products also. But one thing we have to understand that our IT industry will not transform into product industry. There is a fundamental difference between the product companies and the IT companies, and the fundamental difference is since the inception of that company, the kind of talent that is recruited, the thought process that talent has, the way they look at a code at a very basic level. I'm talking the way they look at code is very different from any programmer from IT service industry would look at a code, right? So very at the ground level, the practices that are followed to develop a product, that's also very different. So our IT industries will not suddenly transform into a product companies. So what's happening is the product companies will stay there as it is. It is a wrong expectation. It's like asking a shark to climb a tree and then judging that you're no good. But what's happened is our IT companies have spent significant period of time working in various domains, so the domain understanding has gone up very significantly, and that's where the next trend is coming, which is called as the productized IT, right? So productized IT is basically how that has developed. So when you are a young company and you are servicing your first contract in a particular domain, you execute that contract, and then उसके बाद में क्या होता है, people हर किसी का understanding यही है that it's a templatized work, right? So you execute a certain kind of a project for some company, you do the similar stuff for another company from the same domain. So you execute multiple such contracts for multiple customers from the same domain, and then your understanding on the domain grows very significantly. So you start understanding how process should be optimized or efficiencies kis pockets mein leke aani hai. So that's where you start releasing your something called as rapid deployment tools, right? So it's very basic version of a product. It's not a product. That you basically tell your customer that, hey, we have this rapid deployment tool, we understand a process. For example, we understand a procurement process in certain areas, we understand logistic processes, and for those processes at a bare bone level, we have this rapid kind of an accelerator. So I'll come and I'll deploy it at your location. So if I am to develop that accelerator from the scratch for you, it will take me X number of months, but with this accelerator and or the rapid deployment tool that I have, the time will cut down to a couple of weeks. So that's where these companies are unlocking values. From accelerator, we went to the rapid deployment tools, and then you have multiple such tools put together, and then you have a product coming out of it. So if you look at TCS or LTI, for example, I have written a couple of threads, and also in some of the spaces, I have talked about which company has what product. So productized IT is the way forward, but we will not become a product market kind of a thing. Unfortunately, the talent that is required to develop a product that's primarily moving to US, I'm not saying that it's not there, or it's in the startup ecosystem. So I think that's my view, unless you have a very specific question on top of it.
Yeah, Mia. I'll come to that. In the meantime, Ganesh, you can unmute yourself and ask question from Amir.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Prince and Ravindra, for giving me this opportunity to interact with Mr. Ameya. He has been a good guide on IT sector, and I am following him, and his threads are really very, very interesting. So, first of all, I thank him for educating us in a finer points of IT business. Actually, I have been in this stock market for more than 25 years now. and I have been a follower of mainly IT companies. I have been tracking IT companies very closely. But the fineness of this business model is being educated by Mr. Amir. Thanks a lot for that. So coming to the point, I mean, I just want to know, say these IT companies, as you said, is having excellent corporate governance, good cash balance, and good profit, clean balance sheet. In spite of all these things, even if we are anticipating 2-3 quarters of downtrend or recession in US, still I think they're better placed than any other sectors in the market. And in spite of that, I am very surprised to see the market reacting to today's Mindtree results. So I am absolutely unable to understand this particular situation. Whereas after beating so much in the market, still we are seeing downtrend in these type of companies. So can you just tell me the phenomena or the reason behind this, probable reason behind it? It will
Yeah,
be better for us.
sure. So actually, what happened is, suddenly, as Ravi said it, the initial lumpiness in the cloud or the digital revenue that basically changed the perception of a lot of analyst community, right? So a lot of people who were not looking at IT from that perspective, they suddenly, they were spoiled with numbers. So if you listen to the con calls, uh, एक तो भी analyst ऐसा होता है who says that you have spoiled us with numbers, right? So that recalibration of expectation is what going on at the moment. So there is no problem, as you correctly said. It's very clean business. Promoters are pretty good. They have skin in the game. There are no corporate governance issues in primarily most of the IT companies. But it's the recalibration of expectation. People thought that this lumpiness is not really a lumpiness, but it's a structural change, right? So it wasn't a structural change, right? So that's that's where the mismatch is coming from, and that is why market is currently so pessimistic about the companies. And even though companies are posting if you actually compare on an absolute level, the companies are posting pretty good numbers. And even then, it's the market is beating the companies, beating them down black and blue. It's only because of the recalibration of the expectation. It may go on for a while, but as something I always say to myself is, you don't have to understand something why is it happening all the time, right? I mean, इट्स मार्केट राइट, वो उसको जिस तरह से ट्रीट करना है किसी रिजल्ट को, वो उसको कंटिन्यू करेगा. एंड यू हैव बीन इन मार्केट फॉर 25 years, so you know this better than most of us, right? But the recalibration will happen over next couple of quarters. What I am interested to look at is how market treats once the attrition number starts coming down and the margin stays where it is. And I have always been very proactively saying that the certain margin levels are not sustainable. So if you are looking at, let's say, 15 to 18% of margin, then that's a pretty good margin for an IT company. You can't expect them to post outrageous margins, and eventually that margin mean reversion will happen. आज नहीं तो कल होगा, definitely होगा. So it's just the recalibration of the expectation, to answer in a very straightforward manner. There is no other reason as such. And क्या होता है, unfortunately our IT companies, they're somehow still pegged with the US technology companies. So if Nasdaq falls and suddenly there are talks about Google slowing down on hiring and all, उसका impact अपने market पे भी होता है. But what people don't read fine print, right? So Google हो गया या TCS हो गया, they have given a guidance, or they have recruited fewer people this quarter, or they'll probably recruit fewer people next quarter. But every company has a capacity estimations, right, based on the opportunities that they see. And not necessarily they will always keep on recruiting more and more and more people. So again, we are coming to that phase. So suddenly jo cloud business ka lumpiness tha, people thought there are more number of people needed, but slowly people are waking up to the fact that you really don't need 4, 5, 6 people to basically take your workload from on-premise system to a cloud, right? So if you hire a right skill, you can achieve a scale. So that's what the key is. I hope that answers.
Ganesh, any further question, or shall we move on to next question?
One small question I want to ask. As you said, the positioning in IT company is a very crucial. And just want your view. It's not a advice or a recommendation or like that. But as a view, I want to just have your view on Coforge and Zensar Technologies positioning in the IT business, not as a stock market perspective. That's all from me, Amit. Thank you very much.
Okay. So Zensar is pretty good. I have written a thread on it. They have a something called as Zen Labs. So that's something interests me. They are doing pretty good work in that. But whether they will achieve a scale or not, we are not really sure. So what happens with these small cap companies, I'll tell you. There is something called as pilot trap. What happens is these companies take the initiatives that, for example, I want to develop something on blockchain, just for an example, right? Or I want to develop a predictive algorithm, and let's call it that AI predictive algorithm, something like that. So all these fancy words, right? So to lure the investors in, they start something. It's a small proof of concept kind of a project with not many features, not many functional processes, and not many scenarios covered in, and then they execute it, and then they say, okay, now we are building a capability on top of this, right? But not necessarily everybody is able to scale that into something that can be sold in the market at a premium, right? So many companies basically get stuck in that silo, in that pilot trap, for a longer, for a significant period of time. So that's why you should never get excited about any small company talking about, ekdam outrageous claims that we have done that, we have done this. There is always, very significant time and scale that is required to take that into a critical mass level, right? So that's one thing. So I like Zensar for what they are doing in the Zen Labs, but whether it will scale up to the level where they can go and market and sell it for a premium, I'm not really sure on that. On the Coforge, I've mentioned it again and again that the company is very good. There is no issue with the company. Their positioning in the US is pretty good in the domain where they operate. But the key problem with Coforge is the PE ownership. It's completely owned by PE investors. So when that happens, and they have been selling relentlessly for last couple of years, right? So when that happens, even though आपका business product कितना भी अच्छा हो, if you don't have a stable management, you know what happens, right? So if you don't have a stable leadership at the center, you know what happens. So those issues will always be there. And one thing I will also say, while investing in small cap and mid cap IT companies, one thing you should always look at, most of the times क्या होता है ना, लोग ये देखते हैं, it's a small cap company, how much can it grow? Can it become 5x, 10x? इसका market cap 5,000 crores है. Can it reach, let's say, 50,000 crore market cap? So people look at these stories, these companies from this perspective. But you also have to look at these companies from an antithesis perspective. What I mean by that is, in this 2 years, lot of small companies have won contracts जो शायद वो अपने खुद के बलबूते पे नहीं जीत पाते. Okay, what I mean is, if you look at the entire IT contracting as a pyramid, with the top 5 companies at the top, and then there are mid-tier companies like LTI in the middle, and then there are all these small cap, mid cap companies at the bottom, right? So whenever this funnel of contract is opened, all the premium and the cream contracts are basically scooped up by the top tier companies. And when they don't have a capacity to service a contract, they basically either park it or they push it down the pyramid. That's how the tier 2 and the tier 3 companies win some of the contracts which they would not have won on their own capability metrics, right? And whenever a spend cut happens, and spend cut thoda bahut to, let's not call it spend cut, let's call it spend moderation. That will happen. It's very common that spend moderation will happen. वो हमेशा उतना ही exponentially ऊपर नहीं जाएगा. So whenever spend moderation happens, the guys at the top, they close the tap. Okay, so उस वजह से the companies operating at the bottom of the pyramid, they don't get those lucrative contracts anymore, and the impact on the margins and the impact on the bottom line visible is very significant. So suddenly from 15-16% growth to 15-16% degrowth, that's how pendulum will turn. So you have to be very cautious about investing in companies if at all you are getting into, let's say, milder kind of a recession, or where spends will moderate. So it's important to look at these companies from this perspective also.
Thank you very much, Amin. Thank you very much, Prince and Ravi.
Thanks, Ganesh. So, AKY, you can unmute and ask your question, please.
Hello. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Thank you. See, just I was trying to understand, IT sector, and in that, Ameya was talking about, small caps. When it comes to India, we have so much of, IT experts and actually dominating the world when it comes to manpower. But in a small cap space, do we have some kind of innovator? So maybe let's say 8-10 years down the line, can come with some innovative products that can show the doors to the world. Uh, so do you have any idea or can give a glimpse that which part of the IT can have innovator in India as well? Because the manpower that we have in IT area, the expertise that we have, actually bringing all even in across the world innovation through our manpower only, but the entities are not there, the companies are not there. So particularly with the startups in IT space that's coming, fintech and finance and technology combination. So maybe in that space, some innovator that show the like UPI itself is a product which is showing the world that how the retail payment even on the 24/7 with the large scale, the size that we have in our country in terms of population and transactions, so huge. So even the world is is envy of that. So, do you have any idea that whether India will also, with this pool of expertise that we have, will come up with some company that will show the door, show the way to the world in terms of innovation, and that those entity where will that emerge, and also will have some opportunities for Indian investors to reap the benefit if that scales up in future, because you have the domain knowledge, so you can travel across worse and IT area. So can we have some sense on that? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure. I mean, see, again, talking about skill and manpower, it's a so there is no offense meant when I'm going to say this, but there is a significant polarization when it comes to skills. Okay, so there is top layer of talent who is genuinely talented. So these guys, either they go to US or the Western countries, or basically if they want to stay in India, they work with a startup, right? Because that's where your talent is required, right? What happens in Indian IT is, आपको अगर थोड़ा 19-20 होता है, तो there are a couple of more people who will cover for you, right? So, but in startup space or in the product space, that's not the case, right? And that kind of talent is there. Definitely, it's there. The percentage of that talent is increasing, but the majority of the portion of the otherwise talent that we see is really polarized. What I mean by that is there is still significant pockets of inefficiencies, but you can look at the startup space, right? For example, Postman, which is born out of India and used by everybody across the globe to test their APIs when before launching, right? So that's a phenomenal company, but it's unfortunate that we don't have any other option to invest in such companies. Or Pine Labs, for example, I used to track Pine Lab purely on their tech stack basis. I like the company very much, but if you see, they're going to IPO in the US markets, and there is a reason to it, because all the seed money that these companies have received, they basically need to give exit to their early investors, right? So that's why these companies are going to get listed in US. And all this nonsense that has happened with the valuating a startup at multi-billion-dollar and unicorn and decacorn, that basically overshadows the potential that our startup space has. Eventually that will moderate, but your question is very broad, to be very honest. I don't see that kind of a company coming out of Indian services space, because services by its very nature is very different thing. Your innovation, whatever you want to call it, or productize IT, that is still within the boundaries of the service, because you still want to serve your customer. Even if you're selling a product, it's still within the gamut of the services boundary that you have drawn. So yeah, I mean, there could be some companies coming out of our own startup ecosystem, but otherwise it's a very broad question to answer, to be very honest, unless you have any specifics on this.
Yeah, Ameya, will come to him again. We have two more speakers. And Ameya, in between, I got a request from one of our audiences. तो बीच में those guys are comfortable with हिंदी. तो एक थोड़ा अभी
Okay.
अभी या फिर बाद में थोड़ा एक summarize कर देंगे हिंदी में to give a overview of today's space. Would that be fine?
Yeah, sure, no worries.
Right. So Satya, you can unmute and ask your question, please. Satya.
Can't hear him.
Okay, Sandeep, you unmute and ask your question.
Hey, hi Amya.
Hi.
Yeah, I recently started following you, so it's a pleasure for me to get an opportunity to ask you a question. I had a question regarding the TechM. Recently, I'm seeing that TechM has done a quite number of acquired many companies, and how will this acquisition will impact on the margins, like how things happen when companies like this, or what effect would be on the TechM on acquiring so many of companies recently. And apart from that, I have a question about like today Birlasoft got a good hit. Like the stock price degraded, like it fell a lot. Like how the like what are the prospects for Birlasoft? Like if you are following that company or you have an idea about those. So two questions, these two.
Yeah, sure. So I'm following Birlasoft very closely because of its size and scale and what they are doing within the enterprise application. So they're very aggressive when it comes to reaching out to customers and basically scheduling demos and all. But that's not enough, basically, right? So see, the thing is, one thing which surprised me is the buyback that they did. For a company of that size and scale, they should be investing capital into building more capabilities or bringing some products or some solutions or some framework into the markets. Buying back your stock is good for companies like HCL Tech or TCS or Infosys, who have matured over a period of time and hit a plateau, right? So they want to improve the EPS, they want to improve the revenue per employee and these kind of metrics, which are very closely tracked by foreign investors as well. That time buyback makes a lot of sense. So I was surprised that Birlasoft के size का company buyback कर रहा है, क्यों कर रहा है? What is the need to do that? I don't really have any question on that. Answer on that. So that's that. Coming back to TechM, if you see the way this company has evolved, it was a MBT before, right? So you must be knowing the old name, Mahindra British Telecom. So since the Mahindra had won that very high, how do I say, it was a very large deal, right? बहुत बड़ा contract था वो. And that's why they basically formed a joint venture and then they executed that contract over a period of years. And then वो contract जब खत्म हो गया, so the British Telecom basically took an exit and it became a Tech Mahindra, right? So since then they have been trying very hard to find their ground, their niche, from the telecom to the telecom process support, for example. So they had a lot of people working in the process support, right, which is a kind of a BPO operation, the KPO operation. So they had a lot of people in that. Um, Recently, they changed their positioning again, and they got into all these hyperscalers associations, and they got certifications and affiliations done. And as a part of that, I think they are doing all these acquisitions. So if you look at these small companies, I'll again give you example of LTI. So they saw this cloud transformation coming in since 2017 2018, but they started acquiring companies a little bit later than that, right? So it was done to basically bring कैपेबिलिटी जो शायद आपको इन हाउस बिल्ड करने के लिए बहुत टाइम लगेगा. So it really depends. You should ask these questions in the con call whether certain acquisition is a margin accretive or not. And if you're an investor, then you will definitely have those questions answered in the con calls as well. I believe so. I don't track TechM that closely, but I also believe that TechM trades at the multiple which it deserves, because अभी तक उसको अपना खुद का डोमेन ऐसा कोई niche नहीं मिला है जहाँ पे वो बोलेगा कि I am the dominant player in this segment. Of course, they have some pretty good tools and operations in the telecom space. But then we have the telecom companies who are trying to become technology companies, and they are better placed than TechM to basically launch those products and take those products to the markets, right? So yeah, I mean, I haven't listened to TechM con calls. Maybe you have an answer there, but typically acquisitions का एक सही टाइम होना चाहिए. जैसे ये क्लाउड का पूरा वेव जो आया, उसके पहले जो कंपनीज ने एक्विजिशंस किए to bring or basically scale up their capabilities, उन लोगों को काफी फायदा हुआ because they were positioned perfectly well. They could get more contracts in some more niche domains just because they had acquired certain companies, right? But वो सब flood of contracts जाने के बाद आप अगर acquisitions कर रहे हो, उसके बाद अगर आप hyperscalers के साथ associations कर रहे हो, the quality of revenue is already gone, right? So you are just trying to catch up to the industry. That's what they are doing. That's my honest view.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for providing insight.
Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Prince. Yeah. Thank you, Amit.
Satya, if you are there, you can unmute and ask yourself. Otherwise, we will remove from your speakers and move on to Shubham. If you're there, please ask. Shubham, you can go next. Ravi, if you see any pending request, kindly approve, because some guys are facing issues. They are sending requests I can't see. So in case you are able to see, kindly accept.
May I speak?
Yeah, sure. Look.
Yeah. So hi. Good evening. So my question is, very basic regarding IT. Like I am an investor. I started invested just 6 months back. Okay, and so investor like me, yeah, details are necessary, but I may not understand some of the statements you give or someone gave about the economics and things. So my question is, what about a person like me? How much share should I invest in 6 months? Like if I have 100 rupees, how much share should I invest in? I completely agree with you that I should go to large cap companies in starting. But how much share should I go for that?
So Shubham, that's very subjective, right? I mean, I don't know your age, your investment profile, your risk appetite, and in your financial journey where you are placed, your liability. So it's very subjective, to be very honest. But that said, since you don't have the domain background and all, it's always safe to start from some thematic fund, right? I mean, people may not agree to that, but you can always start from very small allocation to some technology fund. and then track it over a period of time, and then see which companies from that fund has have performed better. You always have an option to invest in the gold standard like TCS or Infosys, for example. But the alpha generation that happens, that will not happen in these companies. That will happen somewhere else, right? So you will not experience that, and that's why I always say there has to be some circle of competence that you have to develop in certain segment. For example, I don't understand the nitty-gritties of chemical space or agrochemical or capital goods, for example. So if I have to invest, let's say कि there is a talk कि capital goods में recovery आने वाली है, right? So the infra spend is going to go up, and I don't know which infra company does better than the other company. So I will, as an investor, my personal choice would be to go the leading thematic fund into it, track it over a period of time, and then take a decision. And I would also suggest that everyone should find his or her own circle of competence, the domain that you understand far better than the other sectors, and try and get your allocation into that sector, because a lot of questions you will have the answers yourself, right? And कितना परसेंट allocate करना है, कितना नहीं करना है, concentration रखना है पोर्टफोलियो में या डाइवर्सिफाई करना है, ये सब सारा सर्कल ऑफ कॉम्पिटेंस के साथ अपने आप आ जाएगा. As for technology investment, I think since you don't have any background, it's safe to go with a technology fund or TCS or Infosys for that matter. And as you are invested, you have skin in the game. You start analyzing the result. You have to listen to all the con calls, because how management says is important than what management says, right? So it's very important to understand that. Attend all the con calls. There are recordings available on YouTube. सारे पिछले 2-3 साल के क्वार्टर के हर क्वार्टर के कॉन कॉल्स निकाल के पढ़ो, सुनो. That's how you will develop your grasp on the domain, right? So you have to do all the heavy lifting in order to have the answer to that question.
Okay, thanks. I understand. Right.
Thanks, Shubham. So Gaurav, you can go next.
Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks Amay for sharing your knowledge with us. So something I want to what you said, like the new growth maybe on the productization of the IT industry. So shall we take it like that, like for example individual companies like KPIT becoming an expert in automobile sector, intellect design becoming something more of a product and developing into maybe banking. But like for example, a company like Eclux or Zensar or Science, they don't have that kind of expertise in a specific domain. So
Right.
they may not grow that strongly as compared to the previous two examples that I mentioned. So am I
Right.
correct in this assumption, or
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
You are absolutely spot on. So you'll always see
oh,
there are some companies will always trade at discount compared to their peers from from their band, for example, right? So if you look at Sasken for that matter, or Cyan for that matter, so there is a clear visibility that these companies lag on certain aspects, and because of that, they don't really generate the alpha as fast as the other company would generate, right? So that understanding is absolutely spot on. Unfortunately, what happens is जब most of the returns किसी sector के आके जाते हैं ना, people then try to forcefully find a value, and that's the perfect time not to invest in such companies.
yeah. Oh, oh. Thanks, Amay. I think thanks
Right.
for your answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Gaurav. Pankaj, you go next.
Yeah. Hi, Amaya.
Right.
As you mentioned that in the large, obviously, some people try to diversify their portfolio. They put money in large cap, small cap, mid cap, everywhere. And as you said, the alpha generation might not be in the large cap. Just want to ask, like from the micro cap perspective, what you would see in a company at this that is just starting at the initial stages. So how you identify that company? What would be the things that you look at? Because obviously they will not have any specific things. It would be just they would be doing normal IT things in the starting,
Mhm.
be
Yeah.
it on Salesforce, ServiceNow, or the small things. They would be growing in the revenue. But from your perspective, what you would look to identify the company at the early stages?
Yeah. So when you said Salesforce and ServiceNow, I understood the company that you're referring to. So yeah, so very interesting question, and I liked you that you asked this. So there are a couple of things that matter more than anything else. First is कैसे बोलते हैं ना, there is thing that my manager always used to tell me कि आपको अगर आपका career exponentially बड़ा बनाना है, so you have to go deep first and then expand, not the expand first and then go deep, right? So that matters a lot. So if you look at these small micro cap companies, they will develop their capabilities into a certain domain and they will start dominating those domains. Not necessarily ऐसा नहीं होगा कि वो domains already किसी ने dominate करके नहीं रखे, but they will always find a value creation aspect कि मैं ये चीज differently कर रहा हूँ बाकी सारी companies से. So that basically gives them kind of a premium positioning within the ocean that is already red. You don't have to always find a blue ocean to grow, right? You can still grow in the red ocean if you have a value proposition that is put out differently, right? So you will find management have a very specific vision about how they want to grow the company. They will not do all these random acquisitions here and there to for example, if you look at Kelton Tech for that matter, right? They did all their growth inorganically, but unfortunately investors के हाथ में कुछ भी नहीं आया, right? So they will not do this capital allocation mistakes. They will be very prudent where they are investing, what capability that investment is bringing onto the table, and how am I able to scale that up. So if I am good, let's say in ServiceNow or Salesforce, I would like to climb up the ladder from the basic level affiliation with these products to the elite level. So ये मेरा पहला goal होगा. उसके बाद में I will start building the integrators and the tools basically to bring let's say the connectors kind of a thing, right? So मेरा focus is still on the domain where I'm working, and it will happen for a decade or so. उसके बाद में once they have achieved the depth, that is exactly when they'll start expanding. So that's a very key aspect you should look at.
I mean, like for this, especially for the micro cap one, you know that initially they can expand and they can grow, but later on, when from somebody, some company from 500 crores, when they'll go to 5,000, then the actual test would be then they would have the proper competitors and all. But if we have to just go for that journey only from 500 to 2,000, 3,000, and should we just look at the revenue growth, because small companies can get the business be it because of their contacts or anything, or they can get in any domain, any area. So would that be okay just to
that's absolutely fine. So the thing is, when you're investing in such themes, the base effect is the most important thing to look at. क्या होता है ना, let's say there is a company which is 50,000 crore market cap and growing with a certain percentage numbers. On its scale, it has given a phenomenal result, for example. But उसी जगह पे एक 500 करोड़ का कंपनी है जो बोलने के लिए 100% revenue growth दिया है, but that's not translating into any significant absolute rupee based revenues, right? It's not very significant. But वो lower base effect इतना ज़्यादा काम करता है, so you can still very easily play only on that base level effect if you want to. But that's again your style if you want to invest like that. So there is no harm in doing that.
A small portion just to track, like just to see how identify the company start on. Thank you, Amit.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Pankaj. So Omega, in between, I have a small question. Like when we look at the expenses primarily, so the employee cost, travel cost, and specifically the attrition side in the company, for which they have to offer more in case they have to hire. So all these aspects, how we should look at it. मतलब जिनको बिल्कुल अगर माने कि IT का ज़्यादा आइडिया नहीं है, तो जो ट्रैक करना चाह रहे हैं, तो how they should go about it.
So it's not very, to be very honest, बहुत एकदम straightforward answer नहीं है उस चीज के लिए. More than attrition number track करने के अलावा, we have to break down the attrition into various buckets, right? Which is, for example, because of the startups, or like for example you mentioned in one of your messages that initial rather बहुत significant period of time तक entry level salaries जो थे IT consultants के वो बहुत बहुत specific थे. So that salary level never really changed significantly. And now that there is a sudden gush of opportunities coming in, people are simply jumping, right? So eventually that will moderate, but I think it is better to track all these attrition. And there is somebody who tracks all these attrition numbers quarter on quarter for all the IT companies. So that can be a good primer to start tracking it. Another thing to track is attrition. In what the trend I have seen is that started happening in India, and that has a lag effect in the Western countries. So we didn't experience attrition to that scale. For example, let's say in Europe or in US until just recently, couple of months ago. But India में तब तक वो बहुत commonplace हो चुका था. So there is a lag there, and as and when these companies basically start clawing back on the on-site volumes, for example, that we said, ये questions के answers सारे con calls में मिलेंगे. Unfortunately, there is nothing black and white that you can just read the result and then basically make an interpretation out of it. You have to go and understand how these companies are breaking down attritions, how your on-site offshore ratio is basically effort mix is changing. For example, the moment you see effort mix stabilizing, that's a sign that we have turned a corner. Also, one interesting thing to track is the recruitment of subcontractors, right? So unfortunately, बहुत सारे Western countries में visa के problems होने के वजह से there has been a very significant delay in getting a visa, for example, right? In Germany, it takes now like 4 to 5 months to get a work permit. Earlier, it used to take a week, but unfortunately, it's taking 4 to 5 months now. Because of that, बहुत सारे freelance and subcontracting roles companies release कर रहे हैं market में, because they have an immediate requirement and they have to fill it no matter what. So that basically impacts their margin. So if you see the subcontracting portion of recruitment is going down, that means that ये सारा attrition वाला जो भी झमेला create हुआ है, we have turned a corner there. I think that's how we should track it.
Fine. So before coming to Rahul, sorry for keep you waiting, Rahul. There is one question in the comments, Ameya, and the question says, compared to IT, is there any lumpiness expected in ER&D spends by the client amidst the recessionary phase in US and geopolitical situation impacting European Union?
I will say lumpiness नहीं होगा, but बहुत ज़्यादा consistency नहीं आएगी. So see, the thing is, when we say ER&D business, it's primarily OT, right? It's operational technology. Because now let's understand the definition. So IT is something that happens over a cloud, or let's say in front of a computer, or there are servers and all, right? So that's IT. And OT is basically on your shop floor or आपके factory के floor पे. There are machineries which are connected to remote systems, for example, right? So somebody has to operate it, and there is an operational procedure to it. So that's why that's called as an OT. So IT typically comes under the purview of CIO, and OT typically comes under purview of COO, right? So the point I'm trying to make is OT contracts are, उनका जो लाइफ साइकिल है वो इतना शॉर्ट टर्म नहीं है. फॉर एग्जांपल आईटी का कॉन्ट्रैक्ट होता है, you can execute that in 6 months, for example, or 10 months, for example. But ER&D contracts are not like that. They have a longer lifetime. Whenever the contracts are issued, जो contract से realization होना है, profit realization होना है, that also take a significant period of time. For example, if a company announces कि हमने कोई let's say $1 billion का ER&D contract किसी country में, we have actually won it. It will probably take at least 5-6 quarters or even more than that for a revenue to start flowing in the top line. So there is that lag effect in the ER&D. So you will not see very exponential spend unless this uncertainty goes away. So if you factor out the uncertainty and the US recessionary aspect of it, you will see pretty smooth movement on the adoption. It will not be as lumpy as you saw in case of COVID for IT.
Right. So Rahul, you go next.
Thank you, Prince, for the opportunity. And good evening, Amaya. हाय बट आई टेल यू फर्स्ट कि मुझे आईटी का बड़ा बारीक नॉलेज नहीं है बहुत, तो मुझे जस्ट मैंने एक दो आपके स्पेसेस सुने हैं एंड सम रिपोर्ट्स पढ़ता रहता हूँ, तो थोड़ा थोड़ा सा ग्रैब करने की कोशिश कर रहा हूँ. तो हमें मेरा एक ना क्वेश्चन, ब्रॉड क्वेश्चन है, जस्ट एक सिंपल क्वेश्चन है. आई वांट टू नो कि यार हम ना बात करते रहते हैं कि इंडिया विल बी ए 5 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी, 10 ट्रिलियन इकोनॉमी इन कमिंग ईयर्स एंड दिस एंड दैट. बट आज के दिन जब हम आईटी कंपनीज की बात करते हैं तो वी आर मोर फोकस्ड ऑन दैट व्हाट इनकम इज कमिंग फ्रॉम यूएस एंड यूरोप एंड सो ऑन. So मेरा जो क्वेश्चन है भैया, what are the companies which are focused on India, which are the company which will be benefiting from the modernization of India and digitization of India? So if we are going to a 5 trillion economy in 5 to 7 years, we are going to a 10 trillion.
I'm losing you there. Not sure if it's just me.
Economy in next 10 years. So
Rahul,
what are the companies which can take big pie of this movement? India focused.
I fairly understood, although a lot of voice distraction tha, but I basically got your question. You meant to say that if India is going to become a 5 or 60 trillion dollar can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah. So if we are, वही है ना कि basically domestic growth आएगी तो कौन से companies सबसे ज़्यादा benefit होंगे? That's what the question is, I believe, right? So see, the thing is, there are a lot of companies who basically also post the breakup कि उनका domestic business किस तरह से grow किया है, right? So you can basically track geographical split, but as you correctly said, we are a primary services based company, and we serve those who consume services, right? And the consumption economy is that of US, unfortunately. So you can't turn the tables upside down and tomorrow say that India will become a consumption economy and Indian IT services will still be able to perform the way they are performing, right? So that will still take some time, and I really don't know how that will shape up. But you have to look at a digitization from a little bit of a different perspective. India में, so India का जो खुद का tech stack है, India Stack, there is also a handle called as India Stack on Twitter. You can go and follow it. It is very underrated handle on Twitter, to be very honest. They are doing some phenomenal work, right? So ONDC हो गया, UPI हो गया, IBBIC हो गया, who is primarily responsible to bring all these banks together, form a consortium, and basically launch a blockchain-based product for them, right? So there are these companies who are operating, but these are not listed entities, right? These are all the consortiums and entities formed by government or non-profit organizations. So you can track what these guys are doing, and they are doing some amazing work. And वो level का काम unfortunately ना अपने IT companies आके नहीं करेंगे, because they are for-profit companies. You have a look at ये income tax portal के साथ Infosys ने क्या किया, and the kind of billing उन लोगों ने generate किया हुआ है, and compared to what they have released, right? But there are companies, for example, communication में, digitization में, Tejas Network, if you look at. So these companies who are laying down the foundational blocks of digitization, they will experience the significant portion of this, whatever the value gets generated from the digital India kind of a thing. Indian IT will be there, but as I said, they are there for profits. And वो होता है ना, वो दिए के नीचे अंधार होता है करके, मराठी में there is a saying, दिव्या खाली अंधार. I am Marathi, so दिव्या खाली अंधार करके एक term है. What I mean is that दिया जो होता है उसके exact dot नीचे आप देखोगे तो basically there is darkness. What I'm trying to say is, even if such kind of contracts or such kind of work is released in the domestic markets, it will not be, how do I say, it will always be for a significant portion of profit generation, which, for example, Infosys has done, right? So ये जो other consortiums हैं, I'm interested to track them. India Stack, ONDC, these guys will unlock more value. It may or may not be possible for investors to participate into that, but eventually some portion will anyways come. For example, जो government का GEM portal है, right? So that contract was awarded to Intellect Design. So that was a proxy play. So people could have played a proxy play on that initiative through Intellect Design, just for an example. So just keep on track, keep tracking whoever is having more than 10 or 5% domestic revenues. All these companies release fact sheets, right? So fact sheets में आपको clearly दिख जाता है domestic कौन से company का कहाँ पे कितना grow कर रहा है. There are some companies like Mustech, for example, who are hell bent focus on Western markets, UK markets, and then जब UK market में slow down आएगा, then we'll go to the US markets and all. But these splits will not have any domestic portion to it, right? So just go through all the fact sheets. देखो कौन domestic revenue किसका grow कर रहा है, कौन से pockets में grow कर रहा है. Another problem is if you look at Tejas Network, I'm giving you as an example, they have pretty good, robust domestic business, but the receivables from that domestic business is actually impacting their bottom line, and they have written off very significant portion just because they are unable to recover the money, right? So वो aspect भी एक है. It becomes a very broad discussion कि इसमें से कौन benefit होगा. मुझे लगता है India Stack is doing phenomenal work, and some proxy opportunities will emerge, but we have to be on our toes to see who is the proxy play for it.
Yeah, thanks, Amir. So, Satya, one last chance. If you are there, unmute and ask your question, please.
Hi, sorry. Good evening, sir, and good evening, Amaya. This is Satya. Sir, a small question, sir. That's actually what is your view on this LTI and Mastech? Because both are working on this cloud computing, but I'm invested in the both. But
everybody is right.
Of course, my what are the percentage portfolio is more in LTI, being somewhat mid cap. But the thing is that I'm not able to understand what is the difference between these two. Both are working on the cloud computing, and just your view on these two companies will help me a lot.
Okay. So, see, the thing is, cloud computing is a relatively very broad topic. उसके अंदर ना काफी सारा आ जाता है, infrastructure as a service, platform as a service. So I'll not get into nitty-gritties of that. But I would say LTI is relatively diverse when it comes to the portfolio and the offerings. Whereas Mustech is very focused only on Oracle, and recently they have started positioning with some other products and framework offering companies. So that's at the fundamental level, that's the difference between these two companies. A company ko specifically, Mustech has pretty good understanding of UK government processes. So वहाँ पे उनको कोई beat नहीं कर सकता है. That's a fact. But you also have to keep a tab. For example, I always say this: deal win हुआ है, that means customer has probably given you a contract or given you a PO, or probably just expression of interest हो सकता है. Not necessarily that translates into an implementation. And I know from my network that there are some pretty good product companies जो इंडिया में लिस्टेड हैं, जिन्होंने डील अनाउंस किए हैं, बट उनके implementations नहीं हो रहे हैं. The same thing is happening in UK. For example, the spend is released, the contract is awarded, but the project or that contract is not getting ramped up, right? So you have to keep a tab on all these aspects. So I would prefer a diverse company than somebody who is late to the party, to put it very bluntly.
Okay,
but यार हर कोई क्लाउड कर रहा है, हर कोई ये सब jargon overload हो रहा है, and that's what is exactly misguiding investors. And if you hear all these jargons, you should just simply run away. You don't have to say I'm a digital company or I'm a cloud company by saying cloud 100 times on your web page, right? So anyways,
yeah. So guys, I'm getting some comments like people are sending requests, I'm not receiving their requests. So guys, I would request you guys to comment the questions you have. I try to take up the relevant questions. And also, if you are liking the space, kindly follow handles of Ameya. And if you find our spaces relevant, kindly associate so that you get notification in future. Yeah, Fact Finder, over to you.
Yes, thanks a lot, Prince, and I'm sorry I joined quite late. Amiya, just before I ask a question, I just wanted to share some thoughts based on what I've heard. But I'll ask you my question a little later. But one is there. See, though there are a lot of few people on the space who ask this question about India 5 trillion economy. You know what? Just ignore that. Okay, it's not going to be an easy task because India is not creating as many jobs. And that's an issue, and that's reflecting a lot of consumption. So, just for a moment, keep that aside. Don't even bother about it. Second, IT services,
Sorry to interrupt. Yeah, Fact Finder, we are unable to hear you clearly. So, can you check on your voice, or shall we come to you again? See,
Just speak a bit louder. I guess that's the only
Can you
problem.
hear me now? Yeah, pretty good. So sorry. So what I was saying is that to the retail investors on this group out here, don't focus on this 5 trillion economy. It is just a lot of noise. Ignore it completely. That's one important thing. Second, the reason why Indian companies are not product companies in general is because everybody wants to make money fast. They all want margins, and they don't want to focus on R&D. If you look at the R&D expenditure across industries in India, it's very, very low. Okay. Third reason why is India is not as innovative and why we have followers is because India lacks something called a social security system. When you grow up, when you're a kid, at least my generation, who's 40 and above, the first thing our parents told us: become an engineer, become a doctor, get a job, join a bank, or become an IAS officer. Because for them, social security was important. That is not the case in most developed markets in the world. In most developed markets in the world, a decent level of education is free. Decent level of high quality medical is free. Those are some of your biggest expenditures in life. When you have that, and you have unemployment benefits, when you have all those covered, you are able to take risk, which is one of the reasons why in most developed markets you have people being innovative, because if it doesn't work out, they still have a backup. Fourthly, a question about Indian IT, in terms of Indian customers, when they outsource IT, they give you the worst margins. One, because they give you the worst margins. I mean, their margins are half the margins that foreigners give you. Plus, they'll see, we are Indians. We like to try and jugaad and squeeze, right? So that is the problem. What a lot of Indian IT companies do is that they use Indian customers for their worst quality employees for them to learn. And then using that, once those guys learn, they then take them to the better quality customers who for them are higher margin, right? Now let me also tell you something, and Ameya, you mentioned about the stack. Okay, a lot of people don't realize this. I know we love to keep talking about how great India's UPI is and that we've reached $1 trillion worth of transactions. Yeah, China's transactions on their Alipay and WeChat. I mean, they introduced QR codes 5 or 6 years before we did. Okay, their total transactions on these networks is $40 trillion, 40 times India. But because it doesn't reside in the banking system, we do not want to consider that. But for all practical purposes, they are digital transactions. So, for God's sake, don't assume that we are the only country in the world of creating path-breaking stuff. in financial services. Okay, a lot of other countries are doing it differently. That's it. It's important to keep us on the ground. Now I'll give a very interesting example.
Sorry to come in between. Fact Finder, we are short on
Yeah,
time. We
one
will
last
have your
important
views in
point.
the
Last
meantime.
important part. This point is very important. We have a lot of startups in India, but a lot of the startups in India don't use a lot of IT engineers. They do pay really well, but they don't use. So there was a very interesting report that was published about a year and a half ago by the Ken, where they added up the number of engineers across various startups in India that were extremely well funded, above $100 million valuation. That number was a paltry 10,000 engineers. That's it, across all their startups. Maybe the number is now 70,000 or 50,000. But just think about it this way: that number of 50,000 versus 5.5 million IT engineers in our country. It's still a very small number. Okay, so just while you like to hear about startup and an IT, just bear in mind there's still a very small subset of the total base of IT engineers. I just wanted to share a few of these things because, and now my question to Amiya is, Amiya, what do you think of, I mean, there was this recent report that came out a few days ago in the US where the SME uh, and the corporate, what do you call, sentiment is lower than 2007 as per the latest survey. Mm-hmm. And obviously, this will not get reflected in IT contracts. I mean, because this survey just came out 2 days ago. The previous survey came out a month before, but the fall has been dramatic. Mm-hmm. What do you think about the kind of outlook for IT companies? And do you think that what IT companies are talking today are reflective of the real environment?
Yeah, pretty good question. So situation is very fluid. You know, पहले जो फॉर एग्जांपल एस्टिमेट्स देते थे दैट स्पेंड कट्स नहीं है, स्पेंड मॉडरेशन नहीं है. So I'll give you a very straightforward example from my network. So I speak to some of the people who are at a very senior level in a lot of enterprise companies. And when I was talking to them, let's say like 2-3 months ago, they were telling me that we are letting go some of the contracts, whoever is not giving us the margins that we need. So we are absolutely uncompromising on margins. So we want to make this, if you are giving me, okay, otherwise just go. Couple of weeks ago, I spoke to the same guys, and the sentiment was completely different. What they said is, we are not giving away any work. Earlier, ऐसा था कि लोग हमारे पास आ रहे थे काम के लिए, and we were just deciding कौन सा लेना है, but that has now changed. So people are not parking contracts, that's for sure. But I would say that people are cautious because of the war and the recession and the inflation uncertainties. I don't know how that will play out. Especially, I don't believe in saying this. I don't want to say this that this is transitionary, because we saw what happened when somebody said inflation is transitory, right? So yeah, you are absolutely spot on. थोड़ा सा sentiment हिला हुआ है. But like I said, because the companies can actually get on their digital journeys, or can basically adopt certain portion of technology at a very reduced cost than what they had to earlier. The spends will not moderate to the extent that we saw back in 2008 or 2007, for example. There will be some cuts on the operational or the edge level, but the spends will continue at a certain pace. It will not go exponentially up, but it will not moderate beyond a point. That's my genuine view. But as I said, this is very fluid. If you and I speak, let's say 2 months down the line, the situation may be very different. And I won't be surprised some of the small cap companies suddenly posting negative double digit drop on their margins, or their top lines, for example. But whatever points you mentioned, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, especially the point that you mentioned about the domestic businesses. The worst of the talent basically gets allocated on those projects, and unfortunately, those companies, they don't want to pay. And I'm taking a little bit more time here just to give a perspective to this. When I was running my startup, I went to a lot of Indian companies, including the listed ones. I had a product which was automating their O2C, order to cash processes, and then basically the payment settlement, invoice to payment, PO2 in payment processes. सो जिस चीज के लिए किसी भी एक ट्रेडिशनल मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कंपनी को पूरा डिपार्टमेंट बनाना पड़ता है, माय प्रोडक्ट वाज एबल टू डू दैट एट अ फ्रैक्शन ऑफ अ कॉस्ट and at a fraction of a time. And no matter how good your product is, the pushback was, we can employ cheap talent or cheap resources, cheap manpower, but we won't pay. So the payment terms जो typically 60 days, 90 days का होता है, that easily gets dragged down, and that's why you see the DSO from the domestic accounts is significantly higher for a lot of IT companies. So I agree with your points there, but as I said, the situation is very fluid. I don't know whether it is this uncertainty related bump, but we'll see.
So just one thing I wanted to also highlight, there was a question about cloud, and with Amia, thanks a lot for whatever you said, for your views. But just one thing I want to add for the audience. If you go back 25-30 years, there used to be something called mainframe, wherein you had one big computer, and every small, people were attaching small devices to work on that computer.
Yeah.
That is nothing but the cloud, essentially. We moved from cloud to distributed PCs, and we are going back to cloud. So this is just an IT cycle. I just wanted to give a lot of the people out here have probably been at 25, 30. They've never heard of a concept called, mainframe computers. So that's why I want to bring that point up.
Yeah, it is in a way. I mean, definition wise, you may say that, but if you see, mainframe was very restrictive, right? I mean, you had to go on a terminal. It was like a server at a bloated capacity, right? Of course, cloud is that, but there are a lot of tools and frameworks and the connectors which have come in. It's like you can say cloud is kind of the क्या बोलते हैं, revamped version of mainframe. But it's, yeah, you can compare these two things if you want to. But when mainframe never basically brought the TCO down for any company, right? So investment was very significantly high. किसी को भी अगर mainframe implement करना था, mainframe के engineers, I still remember the days when people used to go for mainframe programming, and they used to get recruited just like that. But all the companies who had deep pockets, only they invested in mainframes. छोटे छोटे companies जो थे, उन्होंने अपने अपने छोटे छोटे लोकेशन पे सर्वर्स इंस्टॉल करके सिंपल एक विंडोज वगैरह डाल के they ran their servers. I ran such server at LTI back in 2006. So that's the fundamental difference between a mainframe and a cloud. So on a technology definition basis, you may call it that it's a revamped version of mainframe, but the application and the usage per se, if you see, it's a lot different.
No, I agree with what you're saying. Yeah.
Thanks, Fact Finder. So, Hiral, you can unmute and ask your question, please. Hiral, are you there? So, Pankaj, you sent the request again. Any question, or shall we allow others?
Yes, just hi, Am I just one more question? We were talking about all those things about the Indian market and the growth over here. So on that one, there are few companies like InfoEdge, Zelpmoc, even bit of Zomato as well. They are investing in the Indian startup and all. So how do you see that thing? Do you see the chances of growth? What good they are doing? If those are investable or not?
You want a genuine answer, or you want a kind of a
genuine answer? Genuine answer, please.
No, I don't find any reason to invest in those companies, to be very honest with you.
Okay.
So
Okay.
there's a lot I can talk about Zelpok. I mean, I can do a separate space on it, as to why one should not invest in it. I mean, I don't want to take a stance against any company, but anybody who has ran any operation in the IT or a technology space would understand the model that they're working on is absolutely unsustainable. It will come back and hit hard. I don't know what, I don't see Zomato as a proxy for a technology, to be very honest. I don't see that. I don't trust them the way they are, especially on the corporate governance side. Info Edge is kind, it's okay, but all the story and the narrative that was built around it, I think it's past. So to keep it short.
Okay. Thank you.
Also, just before we go ahead, Ravi, you asked one of the topics that it's been a decade why the revenue per employee in Indian IT markets is not growing. It's still where it was a decade ago, right? So just wanted to share a few points on that, if you allow.
Yeah, actually, I was asking, say, I had a look on the top 4 5 companies. I don't remember the number now, but the revenue per employee in dollar terms, I guess used to be in 50, 55, 60,000 range.
Yeah,
US
yeah, yeah.
dollar.
Yes,
And
true.
their margin used to be 10,000, 12,000. If it's TCS, it would be a bit higher. If it's a second, third tier company, it would be a bit lower. So near about 10,000. So we hear a lot of talk about that this transformation is happening and we are working up the value chain. But if I still compare the dollar EBITDA of top 5 6 IT companies, it's still in that range of, actually it might have even come down, if I remember well, that it has come down from that 12,000 range to 10,000 range. So how much of this talk which IT company gives is actually saving their business to move out to some other country or to some other companies, and how much is actually they are improving in their business and moving up the value chain?
To be very honest, I wanted to answer that initially itself, but it's very interesting topic to discuss. So there are certain points which are only my opinion, and I could be wrong also. So if you see any gaps, please do let me know. But what I think is revenue per employee is not that significantly relevant for a services company, and my view is it will remain very stable where it is, even let's say a decade down the line. There are many reasons to it, but the primary reason is the pricing. No matter what we say that we are climbing up the value chain, of course, definitely that's happening on the capabilities front. But at the end of it, when it comes down to money, we are fighting it over pricing. We are trying to capture a market, or we are trying to put a foot in the door for a certain customer, certain domain, and we are absolutely going ballistic over pricing, right? So I can give you a number of examples from the listed companies that जब implementation की बात आती है, they do that on a negative revenue. Okay, they incur losses only on a hope that we will get in a bed with a customer for a longer duration of time, and then once their dependence is very significant on us, then फिर change requests and ये सारी चीजों के through, then we'll start milking the customers. But unfortunately, what has happened is suddenly ये जो cloud आया है, and then all these क्या बोलते हैं migration technology जो आई है, that has made that view absolutely obsolete. So companies, they are only fighting on the pricing. You can say कि TCS के तरफ आप देखोगे, Google के तरफ देखोगे, तो they have actually hired over capacity, right? And then there are currency fluctuations which basically impact. I'll give you an example. So one of the very large retailers in Germany, so they recruit a lot of people from India through their IT vendors, right? And a very common way to get something done is, ये मुझे 6 महीने में चाहिए, double down on the people that you have on the project, right? It's very common in IT. But what's happening is your contract is a fixed price. It's not time and material. So it's a fixed price contract, and instead of initially estimated one person who will come and execute the work, you now have 4 people working on that project only to maintain a customer goodwill, and that's happening very frequently in all the companies. And it's very common. आज नहीं, ये पहले भी था, 10 साल पहले, ये probably 10 साल के बाद भी रहेगा. And people, no matter what, so the question is how to mitigate it. So people say bringing automation is one of the possibilities, but I don't think so. I think it's very overhyped. You can't bring in automation at a scale where it will have any meaningful impact on this metric of revenue per employee, right? Because, and probably a better metric that Vishal Sikka coined when he was at Infosys is revenue per FTE. So I think that's a better metric, and I agree with the way he wanted to look at it, because the revenue per FTE does not take into consideration the people who are on bench, who are trainees, for example, right? So it takes into consideration people who are absolutely billable for a certain period of time, right? And another thing that adds to the revenue per employee metric की हम बात करेंगे. So somewhere in 2014 or 15, I remember the revenue per employee metric for TCS and all these IT companies went down, but for certain companies like Cognizant, for example, Accenture, for example, it went very significantly up, and it was very interesting to see कि why that's happening. कि Cognizant का up गया, TCS का नीचे क्यों आया? But then you have to see there is some portion of consulting and technology consulting which basically brings in a better pricing. So whenever these areas, so that's the next value chain में हम ऊपर जा रहे हैं, मैं तब मानूंगा जब Indian IT companies technology consulting में कोई capabilities बनाएंगे and they will actually compete with somebody like Accenture and beat them and actually win a contract. We are very, very behind on a value chain when it comes to technology consulting. We have the capability. Unfortunately, ये अभी तक हुआ नहीं है, but I know all these managements are still discussing that we want to build a technology consulting because it brings in better pricing, stable pricing, right? So, and skills, we are going back to skills, right? So that's what the difference is. The kind of talent that comes into an Indian IT industry, again, no offense meant to anybody, I have gone through the same phase, is, I would say, very average. There are exceptions, there are very good people also, so please don't take offense to that. But this is a very broad, generic observation that I have from last couple of decades. And because of that, companies को ना वो skill at scale वाला जो चीज है वो achieve करना नहीं आया है, and that's something is still lagging. And because of that, the revenue per employee is still where it was a decade ago, and probably it will remain the same until these things start changing. I hope was able to add a perspective here.
Yeah. And also few things like what I used to, I guess I remember this with that when you look at Gartner reports about a decade back. So what used to they report as the potential outsourcing market and Indian share there, it used to be 40-45%. I'm not very sure, but you can correct me there as well. And that has reached to something 60-65%. So is the potential addressable market is also like earlier, if we used to think about 7-8% dollar growth, should dollar growth not be moderated because you have already achieved, say, if you wanted to scale 100 kilometer, you were there at 40 sometime a decade back, and now you're already at 60. The pace of growth will moderate than what you have seen in the last decade. Is that thought something that thought also come to your mind?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I said, unless the next level of innovation, जहाँ से value unlocking होगा, वो नहीं आता है, तब तक ये growth, ये expectation absolutely correct है. As your size or as your base grows, that moderation has to come, and it will come. Somewhere down 2013-14, Philippines was coming out very aggressively on the pricing, on the skills, on the quality. But unfortunately, वो scale up नहीं कर पाए एक point के beyond. So I still remember IBM was looking forward to move at least 40% of their offshore development centers from India to Philippines, and they made a lot of investments there. But unfortunately, वो scale up नहीं हो पाया, and they completely ramped down the operations there. When it comes to niche programming, for example, आपके AI के लिए जो आपको मॉडल्स बनाने होते हैं, राइट? सो मॉडल डेवलपमेंट होता है, या फिर आपको डेटा साइंस, डेटा इंजीनियरिंग करना है, अल्गोरिथम्स बनाने हैं, वो टैलेंट ईस्टर्न यूरोप में बहुत चीप एंड बहुत अमेजिंग क्वालिटी का अवेलेबल था. रोमेनिया फॉर एग्जांपल, यूक्रेन के एआई डेवलपर्स बहुत अमेजिंग थे, एंड अनफॉर्चुनेटली बिकॉज ऑफ दिस वॉर एंड ऑल, उस वजह से ये सारा स्कैटर्ड हो गया है. एंड अगेन बिकॉज ऑफ दैट, some portion of that displacement will come to India. But as I said, we are transitioning from legacy to, let's say, this digital way of operations. So जो moderation आएगा वो legacy में आएगा, and some additional add-on will come from this digital spend for a certain period of time. But when it comes to price and stocks, and a lot of that is, in my views, a lot of that is already factored in. For an individual investors, because that's what primarily matters, right? But I have seen industry for 2 decades, and I think industry knows moderation kab aane wala hai, and they keep on evolving. There are always new level of growth that are envisioned, and that are, but it's just a matter of time कि market कब prepare होता है उस growth को adopt करने के लिए. Cloud was there in 2010, nobody wanted it. It became a thing only in 2020. So there are many such technologies which are still available, but scale नहीं reach कर पाए. Probably 5, 7, 10 years down the line, those technologies, those way of operations will become the thing. So that will keep on happening.
And actually, I also think now sometimes the premium valuation which IT company gets, it's because of the, like in India, the investable universe is very small. Company which generate actual cash flow, and cash flow come back to the shareholder, the cleanliness of the management, it's very, very limited. That's why these companies, when they are trading in India, they trade at very, very premium valuation. You check Cognizant would be at much cheaper valuation than the flagship IT companies which trades in India. So it's sometimes feels it's scarcity premium, because you have enough amount of wealth which is generated in the country which need to be invested, and since the pocket of investment, like the companies available, which are clean, where you can have a long-term view, where the management is clean, the cash flow will come back to you. That's the reason why these companies actually gets very premium kind of valuation.
Agree, absolutely.
Ankit, you are there. Smart, you can go ahead.
I thank you, Prince and Ravi, for hosting this and allowing me. And it's always great to hear Amaya speak. I have lots of respect for him. So Amaya, I joined late. I don't know whether this has been asked by some other person or not. Just wanted your thought on, have you looked at companies like, say, Carteret Tech or RateGain Travel Tech? The companies
RateGain, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you, Ankit bhai. It's always a pleasure to speak with you also. Carteret, to be very honest, I haven't had a look on what kind of technology stack they have and uska kya value hai, but I have had a look at RateGain, definitely. So how do I see that is, on pure product perspective, if we talk, then they definitely have a value proposition. They have this something called as a network effect that will come into play sometime down the line, right? And since they are the dominant player within the offerings that they have, it's a pretty decent technology stack, and promoters also kind of a technocrat, so they understand how technology is evolving. So purely on a technology basis पे अगर मैं देखने जाऊँ तो I would definitely like RateGain. But again, when it comes to the market perspective, I think they still need to stand the test of time, test of these slowdowns and uncertainties and all. Of course, they have gone through a complete lockdown जो हुआ था, and they उससे ज़्यादा impactful उनके लिए और कुछ नहीं हो सकता है, since they are providing services in the traveling industries. but as an investor, I would still like to see the consistency of their growth and किस तरह से वो लोग basically revenue report करते हैं. I have क्या इंडिया में क्या problem होता है ना अंकित भाई? Investors are used to look at financial results from certain क्या बोलते हैं certain ways, right? And if the companies like RateGain, who are primarily as a service company, they are kind of pushed to also report, the SaaS metrics, right? And वो SaaS metric का understanding Indian investor community में उतना level का नहीं है जितना easily कोई for example जो standard financial ratios है वो समझ सकता है. So I personally would see at least some time whether the consistency of the business growth is there or not. I don't care whether the bottom line is growing. Eventually, if their top line is growing and if they are doing all the right things in the operational level, the bottom line आज नहीं तो कल उनका grow करेगा. Exactly जिस तरह का IDA का हुआ था, Intellect Design का हुआ था, right? So they have to invest right in their initial R&D days. And क्या होता है ना, when you have this SaaS product, platform improvisation में time and time again lot of investments जाते हैं. And platform improvisation जिस quarter में आप realize करोगे, आपके margins बहुत significantly hit होते हैं उस time पे. And then if market में उतना maturity नहीं है समझने का, वो बहुत एकदम अलग perspective से उस company को देखना शुरू करता है. For example, if you look at Snowflake, right? They reported platform improvisation जो for a short period of time के लिए margins impact करेगा. And customers का भी वो features वो use नहीं कर पाएंगे, but market didn't like it. They had to come out and explicitly mention कि ये चीज की वजह से customers down the line will actually save lot of money in the new workload that they are bringing on Snowflakes. So वो understanding आने में थोड़ा सा time लगेगा. So I think it's not fair to look at RateGain from a traditional IT perspective. But it's one of the interesting interest areas for me also. I track RateGain very closely.
Thanks, Amaya. And, just a follow-up, if I may. As you rightly said, that you cannot look at it from a traditional IT company's perspective. Then how would you look at valuing companies like RateGain then?
Yeah. So again, it's a question to management how they want to report their performance. If you look at Intellect Design, a significant portion of time that they were reporting like a traditional technology company. And when SaaS actually became a thing, they suddenly started reporting ARRs and MRRs, right? So, so there has to be a consistency. I think RateGain is reporting all the SaaS, at least the basic SaaS metrics in all the exchange filings, and I think I would like to see the continuity in that. There is a separate session I have. Maybe I don't know. SaaS pe I have conducted a session where all the metrics which are relevant for at least at a basic level for an investor to understand how to value a SaaS company, what basically valuation metrics goes into picture, I've actually described in that. So maybe it will be helpful if you just skim through that once. But if they continue to report their financial performance purely on a SaaS metrics, I think they should continue to do that and not unnecessarily try to confuse investors by reporting some numbers in the traditional way and some numbers, only selective numbers to show the growth in the SaaS, right? And that's IDEA is doing. That's what exactly IDEA is doing, and that's why I don't like it.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Anything else, Ankit, from your end, or shall we move on?
Yeah. You can move on. Thank you so much, Amaya.
Thank you, Ankit. Bye.
Yeah, Amaya, we are facing some issues for which we are unable to take speaker requests. So many of the audiences have typed in their questions in the comments. One by one, I'll be taking those. So if you are comfortable, we can take those questions. Are we good on time?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I still have like 15-20 minutes more.
Yeah, I'll read it for you and then. So, one person has asked your view on Intellect and K-Solve, IT product companies, if you would like to take this question.
So view as in from the technology perspective or from the management perspective, that's kind of a counter question I have. I like whatever Intellect Design is doing purely on a technology front. Absolutely no question about it. Um, they invested in the R&D, at the right moment. A lot of their products are coming for monetization, but there are a lot of gray areas as well. I've tried a lot to basically gain clarity on those. There were some people who reach out to me asking, share your questions, and we'll try to ask directly, reach out to management and get those clarified. Unfortunately, that has never happened. I've tried to reach the investor relations as well, but that also has been absolutely futile. Uh, so, if you ask me purely from a product and technology perspective, I absolutely like what they are doing. But there are some gray areas for which I'm not able to get my answers. So, that's that. Um, so, the kind of product prowess Intellect Design has, of course, there are smaller companies like which basically have a sliced down version of what Intellect Design is doing, and they're pretty dominant in certain markets. Um, but we don't have as strong product company other than that, and if we have, those are not listed, right? Um, so I like Pine Labs, I like Postman, if at all Postman IPOs in India at a fair valuation. I know it's a sin to ask a fair valuation, but if at all market brings it to a fair valuation sometime, I would love to buy it. I like Datadog also in the product space, Snowflake. These are some of the companies I like, but unfortunately, those are not listed in India.
Okay. So we have one question like how much you see potential in digital twin business?
Well, the potential is there, but I don't know what value extractions company will realize beyond a point. Um, so definitely there is a huge potential because you can actually digitize, ideate a product, digitize it, test it, simulate it. You don't really have to run the demo batches for your products until you find a kind of a stable version of it, which is have a right throughput, for example. So you are able to do that. You are able to achieve that through digital twin very easily. But what is to be seen is, what is the cost of operating a digital twin? We don't have many companies who have digital twins. There are some very large companies जिनका ना technology understanding and technology grasp काफी significant है. For example, Bosch in Germany, they have a digital twin. But Bosch is, by DNA, it's a technology company. It manufactures certain things, but by its DNA, it's a technology company, right? So, what is to be seen is the cost of operating a digital twin, and that's still not clear. It's too early to say that whether it will reach a critical mass or not. But it has potential, but it's still too early to predict anything about it.
All right. So next question is from Krishna Kalyan. He's asking which are the mid-cap ITs to be impacted the most due to exposure to European Union, as EU seems to be the most risky from macro's point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I also have that worry, to be very honest with you, since I work there. And given the situation, and I keep on reading, I keep on talking to people who have better understanding of the ground realities. It's a fact that if at all the situation on the gas and the energy doesn't improve by November, the rationing will happen for industries and the commercial units. Of course, the rationing will be positively for the residents, but that also means a lot of chemical companies and a lot of industries, they will actually come to a level where either they will have to be bailed out or they will file for bankruptcy. It's that ugly, and I completely agree with that aspect. And I'm also, to be very honest, I'm also very worried about that. So, but that's what it is. We have to see what happens.
Right. So one person has asked, RBI is set to launch a blockchain-based project on trade financing. So this is a pilot project initiated by RBI to develop a proof of concept on trade financing with the help of blockchain technology. He's asking for your view on this.
Well, to be honest, you don't need a blockchain for a trade finance. You can use Finacle by Infosys and very well manage it. There has to be a right use case, right? they probably are doing a pilot just to test the technology. But beyond that, I think when it comes to the level jahan pe, like I said, right, the technology has to be usable and it should create a value. So that's very easily possible through the products that we already have. Probably they just want to dip their toes and just check what are the possible use cases that we have or what can we do about it. Even IBBIC is also doing a similar thing, and RBI is also involved in that, but they are not able to scale up. And like I said, it's very important to see that we actually break the barriers of the pilot trap and then actually gain a critical mass to start delivering something on that. When it comes to blockchain, you don't have access to the right talent. I mean, हर किसी को ये पता है blockchain के साथ लोग crypto को equate करते हैं. So that's the level of understanding people have, right? And people will have all the understanding of all the coins and tokens and the yields and कहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है. But if you ask what are the in 4 or 5 steps, if you can describe how to deploy a smart contract, people don't have that skills yet. We don't have that scale yet. So probably it will remain a pilot until we have scale with the right talent available.
Right. So, see, many people have asked about the ER&D sector and company to be specific. So, I would like to, please give a overview for those who have joined late. So that
See, the thing
helps with
is,
many questions.
ERD na kaisa tha ki I said that couple of years ago. It's a post-pandemic story, right? And that's duly playing out. So, see, the thing is, when it comes to ER&D, you have only 3 companies and 1 additional IT company who also has ER&D. But there are also operations by companies like Cognizant, and Cognizant is doing some acquisitions in ER&D. Wipro's ER&D space is going pretty fine, but they have a small base. HCL ने ER&D का जो report किया है result, that has been very phenomenal as well. ELXSI, again, phenomenal results. But you have to see that some companies are focusing on only certain aspect of ER&D. जैसे KPIT is primarily focused on auto. They're not doing anything else, right? So there is a single point of risk. I'm not saying that will happen. That may happen. Anything can happen, right? So there is a single point of risk. So that's why it's very important for investor to have a price comfort. If you are investing in a company when the single point of risk is clearly visible, then that's not the time to get into it. Similarly, the question you should be asking is, how much of these numbers posted by some of the R&D companies are currently factored in, right? So ER&D has to break that barrier of narrative and actually start resulting into the realities. So I see a potential there. It will happen, but it will not happen immediately, like in a couple of years. Like I said, ER&D contracts are sticky. They don't have short lifespan, right? So contract ka lifespan chota nahi hota hai. It spans over a number of years. So it's like you get into contract with a company, then you start doing something, and then you scale it up with that company, and it can go on for like 5, 6, 7, 10 years. So that's how the key accounts are built and nurtured in ER&D space. And especially when it comes to ER&D, I'll say it's still referred to it as a technology because it's very close to technology. And there is a very interesting fact about it, and I read it and I completely agree with it. And the fact is 96% of the value in these technology companies are created only after 10 years of operations. But that will happen only if the company is built for durability. And if you look at KPIT and ELXSI specifically, you will see this fact is actually validated there. It took a significant portion. It could have actually unlocked value a lot earlier had ELXSI not done some capital allocation mistakes in their media and the VFX business a couple of years down the line, a couple of years before. They would have reported this growth much earlier than now, right? And the KPIT has also taken a significant period of time to actually come to a place where the value unlocking from all the positioning, all how do I say, अभी किसी ने बोला कि AR&D का ELXSI का मार्जिन बेटर इस वजह से है बिकॉज उनका ऑन साइट ऑफशोर मिक्स इज बेटर, इट्स स्क्यूड टुवर्ड ऑफशोर, राइट? बट ER&D स्पेस में कोई भी नया कंपनी ये चीज इमीडिएटली नहीं कर पाता है. देर इज एन ऑपरेशनल हिस्ट्री, देर हैज टू बी क्रेडिबिलिटी, देर हैज टू बी ऑपरेशनल हिस्ट्री. ये सारी चीजें जब आ जाती हैं, that is when you can actually skew this effort mix the way you want, and that's what ELXSI is doing very smartly. But if you ask me whether LTTS will be able to do that, I would say no, probably they'll not be able to do that, at least for a considerable period of time. Let's say 4 or 5 years down the line, probably they'll be in a similar position where ELXSI is today. So it's very important to see these companies from this perspective. Right now, everybody sees their reporting margins, but you should be asking question why they are in this position where they're reporting margin expansions, right? And if somebody is not able to post that kind of a margin growth, that does not necessarily mean कि वो कभी post ही नहीं कर पाएगा, because market हर किसी के लिए same है. It's the operational excellence that is basically creating differentiators, right?
Right, Ameya. So next question is your view on Tata Communications in the connected world or IoT world or in telecom, let's say 5G and further innovation, how it's placed to capture market and move ahead from cyber security perspective also, as it works with many big businesses.
Yeah, so they have this separate company. They own it. I forgot the name, I'm not able to recall. But they have a zero trust solution, especially for the cloud security and the cyber security. That's very, very, very promising. So it's similar to Zscaler. So if you follow US and zero trust companies, you would see that the Tata Communication actually has the majority stake in that company. I'm not able to recall the name, but I wrote a thread on it, and there is a mention about it. The problem with Tata Communication is they are not able to get rid of their legacy revenues as fast as it was anticipated. They are still somehow stuck in their legacy revenues. The data revenues जो जिस pace से change होके आने चाहिए थे उस pace से change होके नहीं आ रहे हैं. So that's what exactly is pulling it down. And when it comes to IoT, and see, the thing is, you have to look at communication as a layer, right? You can't look at communication from a Tata Communication perspective only. So communication as a layer, so all the participants who are in operating within that communication layer has to perform at a same level, right? तब जाके वो एक IoT का जो ecosystem है वो mature होगा. So what I'm able to see is IoT will probably come to the critical mass after the 5G is deployed. No matter how much we hear about IoT, किसने क्या किया है, it still hasn't reached that critical mass, right? You don't see IoT ecosystems or IoT applications implemented left, right, and center, right? So it will still take some time. And like I said, Tata Communication, the problem is also with the debt, but the management keep on saying that the debt is something that they can manage. The way to look at it is that Tata are doing with their digital theme, and where does basically Tata Communication sits. So it probably sits in tandem with, or probably juxtaposed to Tejas Networks, right? But they are still not able to get rid of those legacy revenues, and that's what is dragging them down.
Right, Ameya. So, Ameya, there are, I guess, people have covered all the company names in the comments, and they want to know.
Yeah, it's very obvious.
So that won't be possible in a small time we have from now. So basically, I would request Ameya, in case whenever you get time, so those comments, if you read, kindly response to the relevant questions which you find are relevant to be answered. So in the
Do I
meantime,
have access to these comments even after the space has ended?
yeah, then they will be there, and you can
okay.
right now also you can check on the tagged tweet over this spaces. In the meantime,
okay.
Ajay, you can unmute yourself and ask your question, please.
He is unable to unmute himself.
Ajay Pathak, if you can hear us, kindly unmute and ask your question. Otherwise, we move on to next questions. Okay, he must be having some issues. Okay, let me come to next question. 1 second. There are too many questions.
Okay, I'll try to answer them even after the space has ended. So
Yeah. One question like Amir recently tweeted not to use historical PE for IT companies as analysts do. Then what metrics should we use to judge valuations and the methodology for the same?
nice. I haven't thought about that. What to use? I just know what not to use. Uh, see, I come from a technology background, so I look at the way business is changing, and I give you a lot of pointers on how the ground reality is changing. Like for example, the deal size will eventually become irrelevant, right? The skill at scale and ये सारी चीजें eventually matter करेंगी ज़्यादा. So I don't think अभी भी, to be very honest, एक small portion of analysts या investors छोड़ा, it's not relevant to compare 10 years median P for any sector, not just IT, right? Because what's happening is IT has become a horizontal for any business. It has become a lever for growth for any business now. It's not a vertical any longer. So that means anybody who is not adopting or not changing with technology will basically either be pushed down the value chain or will be obsolete, right? So that means you cannot look at any sector from a 10-year median PE because 10 साल पहले उन लोगों का टेक्नोलॉजी अडॉप्शन उतना था नहीं, बट अभी उन लोगों का सडनली उतना है, फॉर एग्जांपल, राइट? So hub and spoke model, which Anish has actually brilliantly explained for Metropolis or Dr. Lal Path, I don't remember, but there is a fair bit of technology that goes beyond that to develop that, right? So if you compare the numbers by that Lal Path Lab or Metropolis, whatever it is, or Krishna Diagnostic, I believe. So if you compare 10-year-old numbers and 10-year-old PE, the way they were doing business, so I don't think so. You should refer. Maybe we have some good valuation experts here. I see Akshay, Pratik is also there. So maybe these guys know this better. How which metrics to use, which ratios to use. I don't know, to be very honest, and I'm very honest with you. But I know for sure that it's not right to look at 10 साल पहले कैसे हो रहा था और 10 साल पहले क्या वैल्यूएशन दिया गया था, and you compare on that. So we are nowhere close to what we used to do 10 years ago.
Yeah, fine. So there is one question Ravindra Surana has asked, how cloud is modified version of mainframe, and it's very difficult to explain new technology guys that this is what we have already done.
So see, the thing is, mainframe was kind of a server with a very high bloated capacity, right? And they had all these small terminals, and you would need a certain device to basically connect with it and certain specific programming skills. And when you deploy a mainframe, that means it's like organization wide you have deployed it. So all these ATM machines जो initially आए थे 15 साल पहले, they had all the mainframes operating behind it. So एक mainframe चलना बंद हो गया तो सारे area के ATM machines चलना बंद हो जाते थे, right? So then you basically, what you did is, instead of having a large mainframe, it used to take literally huge rack spaces. मतलब पूरा room भर के mainframe का size हुआ करता था. And suddenly that started coming down, and IBM ने काफी उनके high end mainframe के servers launch किए. So 2-3 rack space में पूरा mainframe आ जाता था आपका बाद में. And what cloud has done is basically it has gotten rid of that infrastructure and launch that as a service. So पहले mainframe में अगर आपको purchase करना है तो server का cost ही बहुत ज़्यादा high हुआ करता था. आपको एकदम base level का भी server लेना है. I still remember paper में advertisers आते थे IBM के mainframe grade servers के starting from 20 lakh 30 lakh. Imagine you are a very small company and you want to use a mainframe का जो भी technology या value proposition है, you want to use that, but you're not comfortable investing 20-30 lakh on a server, and it's only a server. उसको पूरा प्रोग्राम करना है, उसके लिए इंजीनियर्स आते थे प्रीमियम वैल्यूएशन पे. Mainframe used to be very premium skill when I graduated. I remember people used to travel all the way to Mumbai and Pune only to learn how to program a mainframe. So cloud basically changed that, right? It brought down the entry barriers or access barriers for everybody. So you don't have to have, significantly deep pockets. You don't have to spend upfront. You can simply subscribe to that mainframe as a service. So imagine somebody still maintains a mainframe, but have given you kind of a tunnel to access certain features of that mainframe for a portion of a fee. So that's what it is.
Thanks. So next question, Ameya, is with Zendesk being taken private and large SaaS orgs in India, organizations in India which are post Series C, etc., cooling off on hiring, how do Indian listed cos look at it? Incidentally, a few venture funded startups Series A, B have been has been written off by VCs and been hired in last 3 months by listed cos. Do you see this trend continuing?
Basically, the migration or the transition of talent back to the services industries, that's what the question, I believe. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it should reduce the employee cost inflation which has come. So that, yeah.
So that will definitely happen for people who have actually jumped on a average skill scale. Like, see, the thing is, like I said ना, जो बंदा प्रोडक्ट इंडस्ट्री में काम करता है वो कभी सर्विस इंडस्ट्री में नहीं आना चाहता है, बिकॉज वो थॉट प्रोसेस, द वे यू राइट कोड, द वे यू क्रिएट कंपोनेंट्स विद इन योर एप्लीकेशन, आई एम टॉकिंग वेरी टेक्निकल नाउ, वो वहां पे फंडामेंटल डिफरेंस होता है. और people don't really like to work in an IT services and environment unless that happens. So whatever talent, because of the scarcity, has hopped from IT services to the product, probably they'll come back. But whoever is in product will probably never, unless बहुत ही खाने पीने के उसके problems है, वो नहीं आएगा IT services में. That's how it has been. That's how I have observed.
Right. So Shashank, you have any question from Ameya?
Yeah, hi Ameya, and thanks for the great session. So, just wanted to know your thoughts about Newgen software if you are tracking. I joined the session late, so sorry if you have covered it already. Thank you.
No, I haven't covered it. I track it very closely. I have some. I'm invested also in Newgen, but that's pretty old investment. Yeah. So the thing is, Newgen के जितने भी products हैं, except the supply chain product that they have launched recently, primarily they are into the process automation, workflow automation, decision flow automation. And if you imagine business as a cube, you have all your financial processes, logistic and procurement process at the heart of that cube, at the center of the epicenter of that cube, right? So those are the core processes. And then there are certain edge processes which are assisting your core business functions, which basically where Newgen operates. So if at all any spend cuts or spend moderation happens, the Newgen is at the front line to take that impact. And that's what you would have also seen a couple of quarters before. Their domestic business actually kind of, dragged their financial performance very significantly down, because the contracts were there, the implementation was there, but the money was not flowing in because suddenly certain contract servicing had stopped. But I think over a period of time they will evolve. But their growth is connected to, they operate through certain technology partners, right? So KPMG, Deloitte. So they're always on the preferred list, and they're on the catalog of these companies. So they are kind of connected to how these KPMG and Deloitte position them. They haven't tried to create their own positioning on their own, even though Diwakar Nigam being founding member of the NASSCOM, they have taken this technology partner route to basically grow the company, and they have managed to grow it to a certain level. But to grow it beyond that, they have to come out of shadows of these technology partners and create their own value proposition. And I think because of that, they have launched this supply chain product, and it's very interesting to see. We'll keep on monitoring it. I monitor it very closely. I track every quarter and I listen to all the con calls. So yeah, it's very interesting area, and especially given the the low code technologies that they have. See, the thing, one thing we have to understand, that no code low code जितना aggressively मीडिया में पुश किया जाता है, रियलिटी उतनी नहीं होती है, because if you select a wrong no code low code application, that has a direct impact on your technical debt. It kinds of creates a drag on your technical stack, right? There is no going back, there is no customization available, you simply have to scrap it off, right? So that's why जो initial due diligence होता है वो बहुत ज़्यादा critical होता है. That is precisely why they have this technology partner route. So ये जो भी due diligence वाला time waste होता है, ये KPMG Deloitte ने पहले ही करके रखा है. So जो customer है उसको वो चीज़ करनी नहीं पड़ती है. So it will come more, थोड़ा सा और ट्रेंड में आएगा नो कोड लो कोड टूल्स, एंड ग्लोबली काफी सारे अलग और कंपनीज में से भी इंटरेस्ट है उसमें. बट टिपिकल ट्रेंड व्हाट आई हैव सीन इज companies who operate on a process automation level with some low code no code platforms, they eventually get acquired. So I don't know if that will happen with Newgen, but I have interest in it. I don't know if I answered that, but that's how we see it.
Thank you. It was a great answer.
Thank you, Shashank. So next question, Maya, is from one second. Charanjeev Singh. He's asking, I see a lot of value in buying Alphabet at current valuations, given assured revenue through ad business and possibilities of leveraging AI. He want to know your views on that.
What is the possibility of leveraging AI? So that's the counter question, right? It's very easy to say that, right? But yeah, anyways, आज ही report था, right? Ad spends slow down हो रहे हैं, and Google has actually reported that ad spends will slow down because the startups are going belly up. The majority portion of the ad spend was coming from those startups. So I really don't understand the dynamics that goes behind Alphabet. There are too many moving parts. If you understand that, sure, go ahead and invest it. I understand Indian IT space better, so that's where I am.
All right. So starting from Infosys, Persistent, TCS, they have named all the names. So I'm dubious.
Probably they're invested in all these questions, invested in all these companies. So naturally, but maybe we'll take those questions through the tweets rather than taking them head on, because I have a hard stop in a couple of minutes.
And Mia, people are also asking about Telna platforms, Route Mobile and Affle. So any views, or are you tracking those companies, or shall we give it a miss?
I track especially on the products, I track what Tanla is doing. I track Route Mobile also, especially for their products. But you see, the thing is, people will not like certain aspects when it comes to certain companies. Especially with Route Mobile, they had all these, big plans of acquiring a company in basically getting a capability. So unfortunately, that didn't happen. जितना बड़ा acquisition होना चाहिए तो उतना बड़ा acquisition हुआ नहीं. I'm not talking about products. I'm talking about what company is doing, right? So regardless कि technocrat founders हैं and amazing CPaaS platform है, but CPaaS हर किसी के पास है. Tata Communications से लेके Airtel के पास भी CPaaS है, right? So it's not a niche, right? It's not really a niche. And suddenly after not, I don't think so, एक साल भर भी हुआ है उनको list होके, they are buying back. So ऐसे जो corporate decisions होते हैं that basically raise a red flag in my books at least. You are a newly listed company, why do you have to buy it back, right? So regardless कि कितना product उनका अच्छा है या क्या है, अगर ऐसे developments होते हैं तो it's always better to happily miss a company rather than regretting later. And Tanla mein, no matter, again same, there has been issues with the management. Some people will agree with me, some people will abuse me. I have seen whenever I've expressed views on Tanlas, I've got abused. So I will leave it there. Let market discover whatever the true true picture is about these companies, right?
Right. So, Ameya, a broader question basically. So, like people are asking, currently, is it right time to invest in IT companies as such? And if yes, so what would it would be like large space, mid space, or maybe how? If not, if they are not going the thematic way, so how they should go about it?
See, unless you understand uh, at a very fine level, you understand the difference between all the companies and at what level they operate, at what level they have the overlapping business, कितना templatized है, कितना templatized नहीं है, किसका क्या value proposition है. It doesn't make a sense to invest in a company unless you have a very clear understanding of that, right? So I would say if you don't have that level of understanding on how, for example, HCL Tech's ER&D is different from Wipro's ER&D. If you don't understand that, don't go and invest in it, right? Also, it's very important to understand her company. Just say there is a bell curve, right? So everything goes through that bell curve. Life goes through that bell curve. Products goes through that bell curve. There is an exponential phase, then there is a plateau, there is a peak, and then there is a fall, right? So ये जो भी top 4-5 companies है, they have hit a plateau and they are trying all the innovative ways to either gain back the exponential phase, which will not happen because of their size, but they will prolong the plateau phase, right? So HCL, TCS, ये सारे companies आपको एक fair bit of compounding देते रहेंगे एक significant period of time पे, and they will also give you dividends. But it also matters to see whether that company fits into your financial investment journey or not, right? Because without an allocation, dividend doesn't make a sense. So it's very difficult to understand, answer that question कि यहाँ पे invest करो, वहाँ पे invest नहीं करो. I'll just give you some pointers. First is look for a company who has positioned well across the entire value chain of the operations, right? If the company is checking maximum check boxes and have also sustained 2008 का period जहाँ पे contracts, it was very difficult for contract to come by and actually service it. So has seen that kind of market. COVID crash though I'm not even considering, but have seen that kind of a market, have sustained and thrived through that phase, then you can shortlist that company. Don't go, and anybody who is overdoing digital, I think you should, it's very safe to skip such companies. If you don't understand this fine print, either take some time to understand that, or else for a while go with the large caps, improve your understanding, and then come back and invest somewhere else. You can do something like that. मैं regularly क्या करता हूँ, मैं बोलता हूँ आपको, whenever any IT company releases a con call, I listen to all the con calls, right from TCS to Infobeans, regardless I'm invested in that company or not. But I want to listen to every management what they are saying. So that's how I basically, plug the loop or plug the holes that I may have in my understanding about the business. Because if I'm invested in, let's say, in LTI, I may have a bias towards it. And unless I listen to all the managements, I will not be able to get rid of that bias. So that's something that everybody has to do. So that heavy lifting has no alternative.
Right, Ameya. So one interesting question from Vibhor Vash. Any common place where you see CC growth per quarter for all IT companies?
I'm not the right person. Probably Sachin Bhai is there. He's the right person.
You can refer to con call transcript. It's available on Screener, so you can refer there. And in the first few pages, first or second page, it will be mentioned. At least
he's
about
asking,
top IT
I think,
companies.
a consolidated place where can see all the companies CC growth, right? That's what the question is.
No. You won't be able to find it. Bloomberg Terminal might give it, but otherwise, slip it.
Okay. Fair enough.
Right.
I think we'll have to take a hard stop here.
Right.
It's been 2.5 hours.
Yeah. Man, it was great having you. You shared too much of insight for us to think about. And yeah, very much thanks from all of us to spare some time for us. Yep.
Thank you so much for inviting me. So really appreciate.
So Ameya, one last, the fact finder has raised hand. So another 5 minutes if you allow, or shall we?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Yeah,
Okay.
please
I
come
don't
in.
have a question for Ameya. I just somebody said where can you find transcripts, right? That's what somebody said, right?
No, it
No,
was like where you can find constant currency growth for all the companies in one place.
Oh, I see. Okay. By the way, I don't know how many of you know there's a very interesting website called Ghost Stocks India. I don't know how many of you are aware. What they have done is that they have created a system where all the conf calls, transcripts across companies, across quarters are, they've run an AI on it. And if you choose a parameter like growth, it'll show you where the management talked about growth across each conference call across several quarters. If you talk about a thing called margin, they will show you where all this mention this, and you can click on that particular point within the conference call transcript. So you can go across parameters and across quarters. So anybody who says, I want to just look at the company in depth, right, and study what the company has said on these parameters over the last 5 years, 20 quarters, this is one amazing place and it's free. I don't know how many of you are aware of this.
Great.
Thank you, fact finder.
GoIndia.com, right?
Yeah, we'll have a look at it, and also request if you could place it over your. Sorry. If you can
It's
place
Go
it.
Stocks in.
Yeah. If you can place a link over your handle and tag us, probably the listeners will have a better access to it. So, Ameya, thank you so much for sparing time. And initially, we thought it will last for 1 hour, but it lasted for almost 2.5 hours.
Even I thought so.
And thank you for your time and the overwhelming response from the listeners and too many questions. It was really amazing having you and knowing the perspective. An honest submission on all the front, like, so obviously we would like to have part 2 of this conversation sometime when you have time. So thank you again.
Sure thing.
I would further request the comments if we by any chance missed on any questions. So I would request in your free time kindly have a look. If that is answerable, kindly provide an answer. So
Sure, just give me a couple of days. I'm traveling back to Germany
People,
this week. So
our audiences have enough of patience, and perhaps they will revisit your spaces over recording. So, guys, thank you so much. Today we had so many issues over receiving the request. We would have pulled you, each and every one of you, but again we cannot help with the glitches which Twitter spaces have on several occasions. So those who joined, thank you so much. And if you like the spaces, kindly follow our handle so that in future also when we host such spaces you get notifications for the same. And thank you so much. Thank you, Ravi, and thank you, Fact Finder, Value Educator, and all those who come with their questions and relevant addition to today's spaces. So thank you so much. We will wrap it up, and you can access this spaces recording. We will be sharing on that will be available on my handle, and also Recording Space and Wealth Podcast will be recording and sharing on their YouTube. So you can also access there also. And one more disclaimer, guys. Any names taken during the conversations were meant for sharing the outlook and educational purposes only. So those are no buy sell recommendations. So do your due diligence before investing your hard-earned money. So with this, I thank Samia once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Yeah. Good night.